2025.
It is. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. You think back to the beginning of last year, 2024, all kinds of people probably set some goals for change. And how many of them are actually like surviving into 2025? Here we are again, repeating the cycle. Power to change. There's this magazine, Inc. magazine, INC. Yeah, they did a article on this company that followed 800 million activities of people and found that by January 19th, that almost everybody had quit. In fact, January 19th has become
not that far into the new year.
known as Quitter's Day.
Quitter's Day?
Quitter's Day,
I've
January
never heard
19th.
Of that before.
Yeah, on January 1st, you set a New Year's resolution. January 19th, Quitter's Day. Turns out, Mark, that we're really good at setting goals, but not creating habits.
Yeah, I think we might start the new year with great intentions, but we're not really good at following through on those intentions. And it's likely that by the end of the year, we'll still weigh more than we wanted to weigh.
Way more, yeah.
Yes. We'll still be spending more money than we wanted to spend. We'll still want daily spiritual practices like reading the Bible, but we won't be doing that.
Yeah.
So we're talking today to those of us who want to change in some way. We're talking to those of us who hoped to change in some way.
Hope to change, want
We're
to change.
Talking to some people who have tried to change maybe and struggled to do that. We're talking today to those of us who are not sure that changing is even possible. Because sometimes it can be really hard.
Despair to change.
Yeah.
So today's message is for a lot of people, probably you and me as well. It's called When You're Sick of Being Stuck.
Ooh, yes.
When you're sick of being stuck. And we're going to start with a chat question for people, all right? So turn to your neighbor or put this in the chat. What's your experience setting goals to change, whether that's at the new year or just anytime? Let's talk about it.
Tom, today we're starting a new series called The Power to Change. It's a series that's based on content from Life Church and Craig Rochelle. And a reminder that as we start this series today, we're in a series of series based on the Sermon on the Mount. We're looking at Jesus' most famous teaching found in Matthew 5 through 7. And here's a little bit more on that series.
It's time to go deep by going up the mountain. Spend time with Jesus' most well-known teaching, the Sermon on the Mount. Over 18 months, we're covering it all in 14 series inspired by Jesus' themes and topics, everything from enemies and relationships to money and prayer. So go deep by going up the mountain with Jesus and Sycamore Creek.
So in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells his followers, "You have also heard that our ancestors were told, 'You must not break your vows. You must carry out the vows you make to the Lord.' But I say, do not make any vows. Do not say, 'By heaven,' because heaven is God's throne. And do not say, 'By earth,' because the earth is his footstool. And do not say, 'By Jerusalem,' for Jerusalem is the city of the great king. Do not even say, 'By my head,' for you can't turn one hair white or black. Just say a simple, 'Yes, I will,' or 'No, I won't.' Anything beyond this is from the evil one." Tom, in this series, The Power to Change, we're going to explore and explain and try to better understand that really simple phrase, but hard to live out phrase that Jesus says, "Yes, I will."
Yes, I will. So Jesus is really talking about oath taking. In a way, a New Year's resolution is kind of an oath. And there was this practice in his day and age that you would swear by something that was really holy. And the more holy, the more firm the oath was, or something like that. And Jesus is really saying, hey, just make it simple. Like, I will or I won't is enough. That's it.
So as you mentioned, one example of a vow is these New Year's resolutions that we all make. Maybe it's a little bit of a stretch. Maybe it's not, like we're not swearing on something holy that we're going to get these
on
things
my mother's
accomplished.
grave, I will lose weight.
Yes, but we do sort of make a yes, I will, or no, I won't statement about things we're going to accomplish in the new year. As we wonder that, like, is it enough to say I will? I think what I want to emphasize there is it enough to say that I will? That I will accomplish whatever in 2025.
Yeah. If you're stuck and you don't want to be stuck, the cultural context I grew up in on the right, that both sort of culturally and politically and religiously would say that the reason you're stuck is because of individual bad choices you made. You shouldn't have made those choices, and if you made different choices, if you make different choices moving forward, you will get unstuck. Now, as I've progressed over time and moved left, I've found that the left has answered this question too. You're stuck because of systems and structures. And if the systems and structures worked better, then you would be unstuck. And I think that the answer I'm kind of coming down to somewhere in the middle, that it's both systems and structures, it's the way we are together as people, but it's also individual choices. Like, it's both of those things together.
Yeah, it's not either or. It's yes.
Both and.
Both and.
Yeah.
Absolutely. At Sycamore Creek, we've spent a fair amount of time talking about the different structures that work against us. And we've even done some series so far in the Sermon on the Mount about the structures around us that work against us. This series on the power to change is more about your individual choices and about how you, through God at work in you, can have the power to change.
In other words, we spend a lot of time exploring systems and structures around justice or injustice, and we're going to spend some time in the individual choices part of the equation here for how to get unstuck.
Yeah.
So if you feel stuck, if you feel embarrassed, if you feel ashamed, if you feel exhausted, like, there's some good news for you today.
That you are not alone.
You're not alone.
You are not alone. There are a lot of people who feel this way. And the Apostle Paul, who's an early missionary who went all over telling people about Jesus, he said this: I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. What he's basically saying is, I'm stuck. I'm stuck. And what a miserable person I am. He's stuck.
What's wrong with me? I mean, I set goals.
I make vows.
I bought the workout clothes, the gym fit.
I even got a daily planner.
Not only that, Mark, but I made a vision board.
That's next level right there in terms of goal setting.
Here's the problem. We have right intentions, but the wrong strategy. We try to change, but we try to change the wrong way.
Well, that's the wrong strategy in the wrong way. So the question is, what's the right way? Here's the right way. Real change isn't just behavior modification. Real change is also spiritual transformation. We cannot be truly changed from the inside out, transformed, without God's love at work in us and through us. Real change is allowing God to transform us from the inside. Mm-hmm. Paul, that early missionary of Jesus, continued and wrote, "Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death?" I'm stuck. He says, thank God the answer is in Jesus Christ, our Lord. The path to real change is not just behavior modification. The path to real change is spiritual transformation.
Yeah, we got to go deeper than just behaviors, deep into the spirit.
Yes.
So when we say, yes, I will, referencing back to Jesus' teaching on taking oaths, what we have to understand is that underneath that whole thing, the reason saying, yes, I will is enough without all the other stuff, is Jesus understood that God was in all and around all and through all and before us and behind us and beside us. And so when you say, yes, I will, it's not just, yes, I will, but God's there with us.
This can be really tricky to tease apart. Like, how do we actually change? I mean, we've talked about systemic versus individual, but even within the individual, this is hard to tease apart. So we're going to give us all a moment to pause here a second and to contemplate that. How does real change happen? So here's our next question for discussion. What role do you see spiritual transformation play in change? Let's take a moment and let's talk about that. Tom, sometimes followers of Jesus go about this whole change thing the wrong way.
Yeah.
We try to change, but we try to change the wrong way.
All right, so there's a couple of wrong mindsets we're going to look at. And the first one is God, then me. God does all the saving. God does all the work. And then it's like God hands the baton off to me. And it's like, I forgave you, and now it's your job to do the whole thing.
Yeah.
And
God like saved you, but then from there you got to save yourself.
Yeah.
Like you got to make yourself a better person.
and saved means forgave.
Yes.
Like eternal forgiveness or
Yep.
something like that. And that's all salvation means. And then the rest of the work is up to you to actually save yourself from actual stuckness. And this is actually a heresy. And it's probably the one that I more often than not fall into. It's called deism. And deism is the idea that God set the whole thing up, kind of like a clock, wound it up, and then let it go and is uninvolved in the world after that.
It's a super easy trap to fall into.
Yeah. So this is all about saying things like, I'm trying to stop losing my temper. I'm trying to stop you fill in the blank. I'm trying to stop scrolling on TikTok for 6 hours at night. It's up to me. If I'm going to change, I have to do it.
So that's wrong mindset number one. It's God, then me.
Yeah.
Wrong mindset number two is God, not me. And this is almost the exact opposite of what we just described as the wrong mindset number one.
Yeah.
In the first one, it's, God takes the initial action, but that's all about my action after that. And in this wrong mindset, it's just all God all the time. I don't have to do anything. Like I'm just going to sit back and rest, and God will just accomplish everything.
Sounds
somehow.
nice. Yeah. It's like God will lift the weights in the gym for you.
Yes, exactly.
Magical thinking.
If you were to think about this, it's like, I don't like my job, so I'm just going to quit my job to the glory of God. And, somehow God will amazingly provide a new job. Like I don't have to apply to jobs. I don't have to do any, God, it'll just show up.
Mm-hmm. I like how you fit to the glory of God in there.
Well, yeah, or you think of another example where maybe you want to get closer to God, but you attend a worship service when it fits in your busy schedule. You read your Bible when you feel like it. You pray when you're like, I need help. And then you wonder why your relationship with God isn't very good and you don't feel very close. Or you might, I just overspend all I have and I'm in debt and I'm in trouble. And you're like, well, I'm going to go and buy a lottery ticket. And if God will help me, God will help me win the lottery, like to the glory of God. Thank God for this lottery win. I'm going to be all set. That's my financial plan. God will take care of it.
That sounds like an addiction more than transformation.
It's not a very healthy transformation strategy, that's for sure.
All right, so we've talked about two wrong mindsets.
Yeah,
God,
that's the right.
then me. God, not me. But here's the third right one. This is what we're trying to get to through this whole message today. God through me.
God through me.
Paul says, "For I am the least of the apostles and do not even deserve to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God." Like apostle is Greek for the one who's sent. And it's like he's struggling. Paul is struggling with his background that he's persecuted these people who are sent by God. And now he's like, I'm not even worthy to be called one who's sent. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And God's grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them. I mean, nobody's worked harder than Paul. He was beaten, he was persecuted, he's in a shipwreck, he was like jailed, he was bit by snakes. I mean, it's crazy how much this guy works so hard. Like if there's anybody who it's like God then me, like Paul could live that out, except he couldn't. He's still stuck. And he says, "Yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me."
Paul reinforces the idea that real change isn't God then you. Real change isn't God not you. Real change is God through you.
Mm-hmm. The grace that forgives is also the grace that frees and heals. All right, this is where it's not just behavior modification, it's spiritual transformation. There has to be something deeper. There has to be something like deep at the core. And here's like a little basic idea. I mean, this may seem obvious once I say it, but it's not until you say it, is that for spiritual transformation to be spiritual, it has to be spiritual.
Okay. It's right there in the words, isn't it?
It has to be spiritual.
Yeah.
It's not just behavior. It's something also spiritual. Yes, I will.
And God's through all of that. Yes, I will. And in order to have a yes, we have to understand that. We have to understand that God is in and through everything that we do.
God is in it and through it all.
Yeah, and all too often, when we want to change, we come up with some reason for why we want to change. That's a why. We come up for some how we're going to accomplish it and make that change. We develop some sort of plan about how we're going to do this, and we completely leave out the spiritual why and the spiritual how that leads to spiritual transformation.
Yeah. For it to be spiritual transformation, it has to be spiritual.
Yes. Simon Sinek is famous for his book, The Power of Why, and like motivation and why we do things. And all too often as followers of Jesus, we leave out our spiritual why. Mm-hmm. Your spiritual why is God's purpose for you. Your spiritual how is God's power through you. Now, the caveat here, though, Tom, is that your spiritual purpose, it's not just one thing. Yeah. Like it's really our spiritual purposes, because God has lots of purposes for each of us to live out.
Our life can't just be boiled down to one thing, one why. It's like there's lots of whys.
Yes.
But for them to be spiritual whys, they have to be spiritual. So you can think about our addictions to our phones. We're stuck. What's the spiritual why of getting unstuck from that? Well, it's God is a God of love, and love is relational, and love is present. And if we are not present to the people around us because we're buried in our screens, then there's something missing about God's character, God's love in our lives. It's the spiritual why is God's love being present.
Yeah, you might think about our money, and I think a lot of us wrestle with using our money well. We often go into debt, we overuse our credit cards, and if we're going to be better with our money, maybe it starts with a recognition that everything that we have is God's. Yeah. Like all the resources that we have, they're not really my resources, they are God's resources. And from that, we get our spiritual why of using those resources as best as we can. And then from that, we get opportunities where we can actually use those resources to bless others and to make this world a better place, not just for ourselves, but for others.
And these are all classic like New Year's resolutions, right? Like lose weight, spend less time on your phone. But another classic one is to have better health or
we all want that.
And what's the why? I mean, the why for a lot of us is to look better. But that's not really a spiritual why. Think about these bodies. What are these bodies? We are embodied creatures. We're mind, body, spirit. Like it's all one thing. And in being embodied creatures, the Spirit of God lives in us. And Paul talks about us being temples of God's Spirit. So it's like, what's the state of your temple that the Spirit inhabits? And of course, all of us have different bodies. I'm not trying to like make this one body type or like one.
It's going to look different for every person.
Yeah, one lunkhead that you're supposed to be. But the spiritual why behind our health is like what these bodies that God gave us, what is God calling us to do, to use them to serve the people around us and serve in whatever way that your body allows you to serve.
We're going to invite you to spend a moment and to think about something that you would like to do or to be. And, maybe you'd like to be a better parent. Maybe you'd like to be better with your money. Maybe you'd like to move your body more. Whatever it is, I want you to consider that as we look at this next question for discussion. What's one spiritual why for you? Think about the why behind, the spiritual why behind what you would like to accomplish. And let's take a moment and let's talk about that. So Tom, we start with our spiritual why, we have our spiritual how then. In the Old Testament, the prophet Zechariah says, "It is not by force nor by strength, but by my spirit." That's a reminder that the spiritual how, the spiritual why, it all allows God's spirit to work in and through us.
So I have a great experience of this, or like a great metaphor for how this works. In 2018, my family went out to San Francisco, and my wife had just had a mastectomy after breast cancer, but we wanted to bike across the Golden Gate Bridge. And when we were renting bikes, Sam was really little, and Sarah had just had the surgery. So Micah got a normal bike with speeds on it and everything. And Sarah got an electric pedal assist bike, assist. So you couldn't just press a button and it'd go without you pedaling. Like it was like you'd pedal. And then I got a bike that had a tag along on it that didn't have any electric assist, but Sam was on the back in the tag along. And Micah had the most work of all of this, actually. Sarah had, in theory, the least work, although this is the first time she ever been on a bike like this, so she was kind of struggling. Like, 'cause when you start to pedal those things, even when you're going uphill, all of a sudden, like, you feel this power, like, behind your pedal. And it really, like, it takes off. Like, all of a sudden, it's like you've been working on a bike for years. I mean, the thing is amazing if you've ever been on something like that. And it only kicks in when you start to pedal. Now, you would think actually I would have the hardest because I got a kid on a tag along behind me. But when we were going up a hill, you could tell, like I could literally feel Sam start to pedal. And all of a sudden, like there was this extra oomph and we called it, like Sarah had the electric assist, but I had the Sam assist. And eventually I'd start to say, Sam, I need some Sam assist. And he'd start pedaling really hard. And I'd feel him. And he couldn't, it was the two of us doing it together. It was such a fun experience.
Yeah, it's not God, not me. Like electric doesn't just do it for you. You have to pedal. It's not God, then me, where it's all you pedaling. It's God through me.
Yeah. This is the spiritual why and the spiritual how. Like it's God, like you said, God through you. It's like the Sam assist through you or the electric assist through you. I will and God will. Yes, I will. And yes, God will. All right, so let's bring this down to some like really practical stuff in our life. And for me, I think one of the ways that this plays out recently is I have this deep sense of call to racial and economic justice. And if I'm like completely honest right now and vulnerable, I would tell you that I'm in despair about that right now. There's just so many challenges, so many things that are facing us and me in bringing about racial and economic justice. And some of those are external. Some of those are my own decisions I've made through the years or continue to make. And I really asked the question, like, are we ever going to get unstuck? And you can think of this as like, is it God called me and now it's up to me to do this? That's like the bootstraps, like pull yourself up by the bootstraps justice work. Or is it all just God, like thoughts and prayers? Like I'm going to pray for economic and racial justice and let God do all the work. I mean, that'd be really nice. Like that would alleviate me of having to do anything. But really, like for me to have any hope that we can make any sort of progress in economic and racial justice, it's going to have to be both and. It's going to have to be God through me, God through you, God through us. I'm not sure we're going to do it on our own. I think
we're probably not.
We're going to need some help to accomplish this. One of the things that keeps me there is the understanding that there's this huge racial wealth gap in our country. When you look at the median household wealth of white families versus Black families or Latino families, there's this enormous gap, absolutely huge gap. And you can see it in this graph here. So what's the spiritual why behind that? Well, the spiritual why is that God made all of these people. Like, they are all images of God. They're all icons of God. And something isn't right with God and with the world and with our relationship with each other if this is how the way that we do life together has resulted. Like, we're not respecting the image of God in people when there's this enormous racial wealth gap. That's the spiritual why. That's the thing behind it that keeps me going. So, yes, I will. And by faith, yes, God will. How about you, Mark? Is there an experience like this for you where you have that Holy Spirit assist?
Yeah, totally, Tom. I think back to, I've gone to all these different spiritual retreats, men's retreats we've done as a church. And often one of the next steps I have is I really need to get better about having devotional time with God. Mm-hmm. And so I get back from the retreat, I start to work on it. I've got my why, I've got my how, and life happens. I get busy, my schedule changes, and it drops by the wayside. And this is something I have wrestled with my whole adult life. It's embarrassing for me to talk about with you because you're so good at this. And I'm like, I'm a pastor, like I should be better at this. But I've really wrestled with it for most of my adult life. And all this changed for me during the pandemic. During the pandemic, our world shrunk and we didn't have as much connection with each other. And in the midst of that loss of connection, I realized how much I was depending on other people for that connection with God and how much I wanted it for myself. Mm-hmm. And that became my spiritual why, like recognizing the depth of how much for myself, not through others, I really wanted to have that connection with God. And through recognizing that spiritual why, it led me to start doing a quiet time every day where I sit down with God and I read scripture or I read something spiritual and I write a half-page journal entry on it. And it is completely transformed. So like now I would actually say I am a person who has quiet time. I am a person who does devotions, and I wouldn't have gotten there without the spiritual assist. I wouldn't have gotten there without that spiritual why leading me to a spiritual how, producing a transformation where like I'm not the same person that I was before the pandemic. Yes, I will. And yes, God will.
So we've been talking about this for us, but like, how about the person who's watching this or listening to it? What's their spiritual why? And you can think about like overcoming an addiction. Like, what's your spiritual why in trying to overcome an addiction? Or you can think about trying to get organized. What's your spiritual why in trying to get organized? Or you can think about growing closer to your spouse spiritually. Like, what's the spiritual why behind each of those things? Don't just think about the spiritual how, but contemplate and find that spiritual why.
Exactly, Tom. It's so critical that we define our spiritual why, and then from there we move into our spiritual how. But we got to start with that why, in knowing why we want to accomplish this transformation. Why do we want this change in our life?
And of course, in trying to live out the spiritual why and the spiritual how, we're going to mess up. We're not going
to get it right away.
Yeah, no.
For sure.
And that's good news. Like, God is a God of grace. God forgives, but God's grace also transforms and heals. It's not God then me. It's not God not me. It's God through me.
Exactly. It's yes, I will, and yes, God will.